few weeks ago, I received a call from my friend Chris Jenkins from Mansfield, Texas. Chris and his son Jeremy have a company called Lame Horse Instruments. They make beautiful handmade guitars, and they built the six-string banjo that I play. Well, Chris loves the podcast, and he called to say that he'd like to do something to support what I'm doing, and that he wanted to donate one of their Lame Horse original cowboy ukuleles to help me raise funds. Well, I just got it in the mail a few days ago, and it is truly a beautiful instrument. It plays great, it sounds great, and it has a cowgirl pinup on the back. Now, I don't even play the ukulele, but I got a quick lesson from my friend Pip Gillette the other night, so I can at least let you hear how it sounds. All right, there you have it. I'm going to be auctioning this beautiful instrument on eBay in the coming days, so please be on the lookout on my Facebook page for the link. If you don't already follow me on Facebook, then simply go to facebook.com/AndyHedgesMusic. I'll be posting the eBay link where you can see pictures, get all of the specs, and read the story behind the original cowboy uke. I'll announce the winner on a future episode, and all of the funds that I raise will help me keep more episodes coming your way. A very big thank you to Chris Jenkins with Lame Horse Instruments for this generous donation. Please check out the link, and happy bidding. Howdy folks, this is Andy Hedges and you're listening to Cowboy Crossroads. On each episode I interview a different guest and ask them to share stories and discuss music, poetry, and culture from the working cowboy west and beyond. My guest today is Martin Murphey. If you haven't already, I'd recommend going back and listening to my last episode and catching the first part of my interview with Murphy. On this second part of the interview, I asked Murphy about the making of one of my favorite records of all time, his debut album, Geronimo's Cadillac. Here's Martin Murphey.
Well, I wouldn't have a career if it hadn't been for Bob Johnston. He came to a funeral of his dad in Fort Worth. And I was playing in Dallas at a nightclub called the Rubaiyat. And he just wanted to get away from the sadness of the funeral. And he came down there to hear me play. He said he had heard about me from a house painter that hitchhiked up to Nashville and told him there's a guy in Dallas you ought to hear. And he painted his house. And Bob was the kind of guy that followed up on leads like that. So he came there and watched the show. I was playing with Bob Livingston, and he said, would you like to make a record? And I said, yeah, I'd like to make a record. He says, well, I'll offer you the chance to make a record. I'm not sure where we'll place it, but I'll produce it. So I came up to Nashville with Bob. We stayed at Bob's house, and we went in and we did 40 demos. We did it the next day after he asked us to do it. I said, when do we make the record? He said, as soon as you're ready. I borrowed my dad's car and drove all night and got there the next day. And he said, oh, I'm not real sure I'm ready yet. I said, well, you said any time. So he put us in Studio A, Columbia. And just us, just me and Bob Livingston. And I said, when do we put out the real record? And he said, you just made the record. I'm going to add everything else. And I'm just taking you and Bob and your vocal as a basis and his harmony singing, and I'm just going to add drums and other stuff, and then I'll play it for you and make sure that you like it. And that became Geronimo's Cadillac. He narrowed it down to 10 songs. It might have been 12. And then, it came out, and it got a great review in Rolling Stone, and a bunch of things were happening. And then we went to Ray Stevens' studio in Nashville and made Cosmic Cowboy, and quite a few albums after that. So Bob was a great producer. He was the kind of guy who just turned on the machines. He talked to you a lot about your music, just as a friend, not in the studio, but when you were having dinner or breakfast. The Blue Sky Night Thunder album that had Wildfire on it was recorded at Caribou Ranch in Colorado. We were all staying in log cabins, and the studio was in a big log house, and we just played a lot of songs for Bob, and there's only one song he didn't want to do, and it was Wildfire. But Bob was the kind of guy that if you insisted, you had a vision of what you wanted to do, he'd let you do it. He talked a lot about the songs, but not in the studio. Once you got in the studio, you just played and sang, and there wasn't a whole lot of discussion. He just got the job done. His style of producing was to get out of the way. Just get it down sounding good, but get out of the way as a producer. So I think he was one of the most remarkable producers. I mean, the people that he reached out and produced, for an old country boy from Texas, pretty interesting. He was producer of Bob Dylan, Johnny Cash, Doug Kershaw. Some of the more interesting ones, Lindisfarne, which was an English folk rock band. He did Leonard Cohen. He did Simon and Garfunkel. He produced, I'm trying to think of some other ones besides my music. Oh, Flatt and Scruggs. From Lindisfarne to Flatt and Scruggs to Bob Dylan, and everything in between, and Leonard Cohen. So, it's a long way from Flatt and Scruggs to Leonard Cohen. It's a long way, musically, lyrically, and just approach. And he was able to do it all.
When working musicians get together, they love to talk about adventures on the road and share stories of gigs that are less than stellar. Murphy has spent his entire adult life playing music and touring relentlessly. I couldn't resist asking him about the worst gig that he'd ever played.
We were in Milwaukee, and my agent called me and said, I got a private party for you. And we went to this pizza place, and big guy with big shoulders met us at the door and said, we're here to, and he said this, and it was a high offer, a lot of money to play this gig. And I had my whole band in there, a little bitty pizza place in Milwaukee. And we went in there, and they had a sound system set up. And the guy's name that greeted us at the door was Angel. His last name was Italian. And we went in, and every last name in the place was Italian. It was a pizza place, so we didn't think anything of that. But there's a guy sitting in the back with sunglasses on, and he had his 16-year-old daughter. It was his daughter's 16th birthday, and it was the head of the mafia in Chicago who came down from Milwaukee. And they said, Mr. Murphy, my daughter really likes that song, and I hired you to play, and I want you to play that song. So I played it. Came up. He kept sending me $100 bills. I said, sing it again. Sing it again. The only song we ever played the whole night was Wildfire. And we were scared to death. He said, if you'd like to, take my daughter out, if you're going to be around tomorrow, she'd like to go on a date with you, What do you say? You know what I mean? She's a 16-year-old girl. I said, let me check with my agent. I think we might have to fly out of here tomorrow to get to the next show. And it was true that we did have a show, and he kept saying, what's it worth till you cancel that show? Go out with my daughter, Said, I don't know. I've got to keep my word, word of honor. It'd be very important to me to keep my word of honor. He says, yeah, there's a word of honor has a price on it, though. What's the price? And he kept upping it and upping it and upping it. I kept saying no. And I thought, this guy's either gonna plug me or he's gonna, do something. And he finally got up to $100,000, and I still said no. And he put his arm around me and he said, I respect you. I respect you. I said, thank you. I appreciate it. He says, you can still have the $100,000. I said, I don't want it. I said, I wouldn't take that from you. I said, I appreciate your daughter's liking the song, and when she gets older, maybe someday I'll come back and ask her out on a date, or at least visit your family. But I can't do that today. I can't take any more money from you. You already paid me really well. And we went back to the hotel, and I did not sleep that night. So it was a lucrative gig, but it was the worst gig I ever had because I spent the whole show in fear.
In 1986, Michael Martin Murphey attended the second annual Cowboy Poetry Gathering in Elko, Nevada. Murphy has said that attending this event for the first time was like a religious experience, and it completely changed the course of his career.
Willie Matthews and I were friends. He did my first album cover, Geronimo's Cadillac. And we were good friends out in Los Angeles. Before that, he actually did the album cover for a concept album I wrote for Kenny Rogers in the first edition called The Ballad of Calico. And that was a 22-song cycle about a ghost town in California. He was recognized as a really great graphics artist and graphics designer even back then, and had done quite a few album covers for Capitol. And they were on Capitol at that time. So Kenny Rogers was. So that's how I met Willie, and we became fast friends. And so by the time I was in Colorado and had Geronimo's Cadillac and went through my Austin phase, See, Wildfire came out, 1975. We were both living in Colorado at that time. He says, hey, 10 years later, he says, Murph, I went to this event last year, found out about it, Cowboy Poetry Gathering in Elko, Nevada, and I think it's something you'd really, really like. I went, and it was like a bomb went off in my life. I mean, it just leveled every plan and everything that I'd ever thought about. I love cowboy music, and had been putting cowboy music in my show wherever I toured for quite a few years. But goodness, I was already, 10 years deep into my career when I went to the first Cowboy Poetry Gathering. So I started in 72. This was Geronimo's Cadillac. In 82, by that time I'd already gone to another record label and started doing country music. So then along comes this event, and the first one I think was 85. I went to the Cowboy Poetry Gathering in '86, and when I was there, I was invited on stage to sing a song. I immediately befriended Hal Cannon, who was a really good friend of Willie Matthews, and Hal was the founder. And he said, "Would you go on stage and sing a song?" And I said, I don't think I qualify to be in this group. You know, I don't own a ranch. I'm not a working cowboy right now. I said, "It's okay. It's just a song. Don't worry about it." And he said, "We do require that people have some livestock experience, but we don't require that everybody on that stage has to be a working cowboy." And I said, "Well, I think you should. I think you should require that everybody that goes on that stage should be a working cowboy. Because it's going to run away from you. If you don't, you're going to have too many pretenders that are eventually going to try to get into it." Because it was a really purist event then. I mean, it was Wally McRae and Waddy Mitchell and Baxter Black and all these guys, you know, were practically, I would think Baxter was a full-time veterinarian at that time. And Waddy was running a big cattle operation for the Mormon Church out in Utah. But I met all these guys then, and it just made a big impression on me. By 1987, I started my own version of the Cowboy Poetry Gathering, but I decided what I wanted to do was do a festival that recognized the culture of the whole West, and not just cowboys. Because I had been so much into Native American rights, and here comes that activism in there about civil rights, that I thought Native Americans ought to be included. But I didn't feel like it would be right for me to mention something like that, you know, back then in Elko. Later on, when they asked me to be a member of the board, then I suggested that they ought to have a Native American component one year, and they brought in a bunch of Indian cowboy poets. There were a few in the first one. I think Henry Reelberg was there at the first one. And some local Nevada cowboys that did a poem or two that were Indians. So that really sparked me to put on Westfest, and then Westfest became just a huge festival in Colorado, and in 1988 we actually drew more people to that festival than the CMA Music Fest in Nashville drew, which was called Fanfare back then. And that was just a big festival where all the country music artists played. And so when I proposed to make a cowboy album in 1989, a record company was against it. But I said, "Well, you really ought to know about this event in Elko, Nevada." They said, "Well, that's just a folk festival." And I said, "But I've got an event called Westfest, and last year we outdrew, you know, the numbers of the CMA Music Festival Fanfare, which is, you know, the biggest event in Nashville every year and the biggest event in country music." My concept is we were bringing in people that were from the West who were country stars too. We didn't just have Waddy and Don and Sons of San Joaquin, because my idea was, if I can put those guys in front of a country music audience that's there because they want to see Vince Gill or Dwight Yoakam or whoever's hot at the time in country music, emphasizing the Westerners that are hot in country music, I think this audience will fall in love with them. So that was the genesis of Waddy's career, commercial career, as being a cowboy poet in front of bigger audiences, because I reined him in to be the master of ceremonies. It was almost Baxter Black, but Baxter didn't want to be a master of ceremonies. He doesn't like that. He doesn't like to do that kind of work. He just likes to perform, and that's it. At the time, I was a little bit offended that he turned me down, but I can see that now. I don't like being a master of ceremonies either. I just like to present my work. So I mean, I said, "Well, I can see what you're talking about, Baxter, but don't you think to get your poetry really out there?" He said, "No, just put me on the festival in front of a lot of people, and, you know, I'm happy to do it, but I don't really want to stand up there and be an MC all day." So Waddy took on the job. He was the master of ceremonies, and Don played that first year that we did it, and we brought in Sons of the San Joaquin. But we had lots of people there to see Dwight Yoakam, and gosh, I think K.D. Lang was on that show that first year. And over the years, as the audience grew, because we brought in these big country stars, nobody was really doing a country music festival in Colorado at the time. As it grew, people were still seeing the Cowboy Poets every year, and that group of people then learned about them and started going to Elko, and Elko started to grow as a bigger festival, and we were very symbiotic. I went to Willie Matthews and Hal Cannon for advice of who I should book from the Cowboy Poetry Gathering who could handle being in front of crowds of 10 or 15 or 20,000 people. And they said, no doubt in our mind that Waddy Mitchell could do it if he wants to, and that Baxter Black could handle it. There were a little bit of trepidation about Don, because Don is so quiet and so shy, and he's definitely not a rock star type. But he got up there and just sang his songs, and people went ape. My trick was I'd put them right before the biggest name act that played every day as we changed acts. So you coming to see Dwight Yoakam, you're sitting out there to make sure you got a seat, and for 30 minutes you hear Don Edwards beforehand, and people were very big on the cowboy aspect of country music then, because of Urban Cowboy movie, and so many rock stations had turned into country stations because of Urban Cowboy, and everybody was an urban cowboy. And so I put real cowboys that did the real cowboy culture stuff in front of an urban cowboy audience, and it just exploded for me. It wasn't until 1989 though that I made my first cowboy album. That's how all that started. That's how Elko influenced me. I never would have made my first cowboy album. Never. I thought it was my hobby to collect cowboy songs and sing the songs that I sung around campfires at Christian youth camp when I was a kid. Every once in a while. I remember one of the songs I always did was the Goodnight Loving Trail. On the good night trail, on the loving trail, the old woman's lonesome tonight. It's a wonder the wind don't tear off your skin. Get in there and blow out the light.
Utah Phillips.
Yeah, and I would do that song, and rock audiences would go crazy when I did that. I was always a guy that very influenced by Western music. I wanted to be my goal was I wanted to be a poet of my own backyard, which was the West. So from Geronimo's Cadillac on, my music was very much about the West. Not always real country, but hopefully musically evocative of the West. I was fascinated with Western literature at that time. Mark Twain's career in Virginia City, and just American literature, Americana stuff, which we now have a chart for these days. But I thought I was crazy talking about Americana. But I'd been around a lot of creative writing people at UCLA when I went to school there, and a lot of folklorists. So, all these forces that were there when I was a kid all finally came together at the Cowboy Poetry, and I didn't realize there were so many people that felt the way I did about cowboy music and cowboy culture. And it just exploded. It was on the cover of Time magazine. It was on the Johnny Carson show. It was everywhere. And Carson did a segment with me on Westfest too, and I think that was the second year we did it. And it's going to be this Western festival. Carson was a big fan of Western music and cowboy stuff. He loved cowboy humor. So it's the way it all developed. I was already selling a lot of records and doing a lot of concerts and really, really busy, but I just decided, you know what, I go back to my roots. I really don't like being in the rock music scene, you know. With all due respect, I was never a fan of the Rolling Stones and the more dark side of rock. And when it turned into punk rock, right at the end of the 70s, I said, this is it for me. I'm not going to be able to compete with these guys. Because it was me, Dan Fogelberg, James Taylor, John Denver, Jesse Cullen Young, singer-songwriters who played acoustic guitars that had bands, but we wrote our own material a lot. Not entirely, but a lot of it. Jimmy Buffett. And Austin became a haven for me when I first started down that path. Then I got into the commercial country music part of it, and after a while in commercial country music, I said, this doesn't feel real to me either. Both times I left each genre was because of drugs. I've always been really anti-drugs and anti-substance abuse, and I've seen it bring so many people down. And I was seeing that happen in country music. And I said, you know, I'm going to go for cowboy music. And to this day, I'll tell you that although there was some hard drinking among some of those cowboys I met at Cowboy Poetry, it was a lot less substance abuse than I saw in any other genre of music or poetry at that time. So I've stuck with it ever since I put out my first cowboy album, and I've never regretted it. When I made enough money to off of the first cowboy album, I went straight down to southern New Mexico and invested in a cattle operation down there with a guy named Bert Madera. And for the first time in my life, I had my own cattle and my own cattle operation. That's how I spent the money from cowboy songs. I thought, you know, if I'm going to do this, I need to come from the perspective of people who are really doing it, you know, who are ranchers. Obviously didn't have time to be a working cowboy year-round 365, but I hired a lot of them.
Thank you for taking the time to visit with me today, Murph. Really appreciate it.
Well, you know, it feels really good to wear a cowboy hat and cowboy boots and jeans, and you know, that's comfortable. That's been my thing ever since I was in school when I was a little kid, and it's just my culture. So I'll take time to talk about my culture anytime. I sing cowboy songs for the same reason B.B. King sings the blues. I grew up with it. I lived it. B.B. King literally picked cotton in the South when he was a kid. You know, he has a great song called "I Have a Right to Sing the Blues," and I have a song that, in my fantasy, that I would like to write. I have a right to sing cowboy music. Anyway, Andy, I wish you the best, and carry on.
All right, folks, that's it for this episode. I'd like to thank Michael Martin Murphey for taking the time to visit with me. You can find out more about Murphy at michaelmartinmurphy.com. You can find out more about me and this show at andyhedges.com. If you're enjoying this show and would like to help support it, please spread the word about the auction of the Lame Horse Original Cowboy Uke. Remember, you can find all of the info about the auction at facebook.com/AndyHedgesMusic. If you'd like to contact me, I'd love to hear from you. Please drop me a line at andy@andyhedges.com. Thank you for listening to Cowboy Crossroads.